Hello, and welcome to the review of Rundown 5 and the current state of the game. Before we get started, I have a few things I need to say. For one, this video is going to be more rambly than any of my other videos. I'm going to go off in some wild tangents about whatever topic of the game I'm discussing at the time. I promise they'll probably tie back into whatever the main topic was, hopefully. So whenever that happens, just please bear with me. Number 2, these are my own opinions. You may not have the same ones. If you want to have a discussion, I'm always down to have one for pretty much anything related to this game. So you can DM me on Discord, or you can leave a comment. Whatever is up to you. I don't really care. Finally, this is going to be a lot less structured than any of my level guides, so somewhere around here I'm probably going to leave timestamps that link to whatever I'm talking about at the time. I don't really know what they happen to be yet. We'll figure it out when we get there. For the most part, this video is going to be split into 3 parts. Part 1 is going to be talking about just my general review of anything new to this rundown, so new enemies, new environment, that kind of stuff. Part 2 is going to be talking about the state of the game, so things that I feel like should be added to the game, as well as problems that I have with the game, and solutions to said problems. And Part 3 is just going to be a level tier list, because those are fun to make, and I think it would be funny to close out the thing with that, so we're going to do that. So before we get started with anything else in the rundown review, we're going to talk about boosters first. Personally, I don't really care that they exist. They were implemented because it would make the game easier for newer players and for people that are struggling with some of the harder levels. You know, you're struggling with one of the levels, throw a booster on. Done. You can make it easier. They do their job perfectly. That's exactly what they do. I don't really have any problems with them. Some people hate them because it makes the game feel more arcadey. I feel like the game needs it, but that's just me personally. The only thing I feel like is out of touch is the provisions booster. I feel like it is way out of line because it just allows you to run around and shoot everything like a monkey with literally no consequence. So I think they just nerf it to make provisions apply only to the person that has the booster. For the time being, I think boosters are fine, but I do need to keep an eye on them because if they become more of like a main focus of the game, it is going to clash with the vibe and just the general atmosphere of the game, which I feel like could cause problems. But for now, they're fine. I don't really care too much about them. With that done, we'll move on to some of the things people actually care about. So let's get started by talking about the new environment, which is the Floodways environment. A quick explanation if you don't know how they do the levels in this game. They work off of a tile set system. So they will create different environments which fall under their own unique tile sets, which would be floodways, the labs, or the mines, etc. They then create rooms, which are called tiles, and they just combine these rooms together to create some of the levels, which is why you see a lot of reused assets. It's just a byproduct of how small the development team is. On that note, while the development team is small and we shouldn't expect a huge amount of tiles, especially for a new tile set, there simply is just not enough in Floodways. In the 3 levels that we have this rundown that included the Floodways tile set, there is only one room that is unique across all 3 of those levels, and it is the second zone in B4, which you don't really spend a whole lot of time in unless you just want to kite the whole time. I'm kind of disappointed by that. I did expect there to be at least more variety in the tiles that we did get. On C1, they repeat the same tiles multiple times in the same level, which is just really sad. It's kind of disappointing that they didn't have enough tiles to even create a level without having to repeat rooms multiple times. Getting that out of the way, I do think it is a good environment. I do think it's probably my favorite one at this point. I like the color palette of it, as well as some of the nice touches. The signs that are on the walls in most levels, they're not really signs anymore in the Floodways. They're paint that's been put on the walls is kind of peeling off, so I think that's a really nice touch. The environment does look great for what it's worth. It's just really disappointing that there isn't a lot of it. The last thing is that there is a bit more verticality with it than there is in other tile sets from what I've seen so far. Sometimes you have to think about stealth more, but a lot of the time you just be hop past everything. It's not really too big of a deal anyways. But for newer players, you may need to think about stealth a little bit more because there are a lot of graded floors and ladders, so elevation actually comes into play. I don't really have much else to say about the new environment. For me, it's not really personally too big of a deal. I don't really care about the environments as much as I do the actual gameplay. So for me, it's not really too big of a selling point, but for other people it may be. Moving past that, we'll go to some of the new things that got added this rundown, being the cocoons or respawn rooms and the charger scout. Personally, I hate both of them in their current state. I don't think they're necessarily bad ideas, but they do feel like they were very poorly implemented. We'll start with the charger scout. It's supposed to be a more team-oriented way of killing scouts, but it just fails miserably because if you're on any form of decently high latency, like even 100 ping, it's pretty much impossible to stealth kill these things. It doesn't really seem like they accounted for latency at all when they were designing this enemy. So it just becomes a real hassle to do it, and it's most of the time because everyone's got hell rifles or snipers anyways this rundown, you just shoot it. There really is hardly any scenario, unless you're doing D1, that you don't shoot the Charger Scout. It's either you C-foam or shoot it 100% of the time, without fail. You can definitely melee them, it's definitely possible, but it again just really isn't worth the hassle of doing it. It's not terribly difficult to fix this enemy. I think they should just give it some form of stagger once you hit it with a hammer. Right now, scouts just in general don't stagger, like, almost at all. You can do some funny things. You can double tap into the back of the head with the DMR, or you can rapid fire in their back with the revolver. They do have a very, very small stagger, but right now it's not really enough to make hammer killing Charger Scouts viable, especially if you're on high ping. So I feel like they just need to give it some form of stagger so you have more forgiveness when it comes to actually hammer killing them. And who knows, maybe this might change with time. The general floor skill of the player base is going to go up over time. You know, players that play today are obviously way better than people that just started Rundown 1, even if they're just starting at the game. There are so many more resources and things available to help new players learn the mechanics of the game. Just the general player base skill is going to go up over time, and this is true no matter what game it is. League of Legends, terrible example because the game fucking sucks, but there's a technique on a character called Lee Sin that is known as insecking. When it was done originally in 2013, it was considered very, very difficult, very hard to execute. Only really, really good players could do it. And fast forward to today, it's done by silver players, which are, you know, the second lowest skill bracket. Things change over time, and this may also be true for Charger Scouts. We'll have to see. Moving on to the cocoons and respawn rooms, I don't think this is going to change over time. In its current state, this is a very terrible mechanic. Basically how they work is if you go 2 rooms away and you're in a different zone, it'll respawn everything that was in the respawn room. The problem with this is that it promotes a really unfun gameplay where one person just AFKs in a room and literally does not play the game. This is terrible for a number of reasons, but the main one being is that it's just super unfun. You literally force someone on your team to not play the game, and someone's going to do it every single time because it's the best way to do the level. If you're playing a level like C1, and you wake up one of the giant rooms and you clear it, someone's respawn blocking until you get ready to do the uplink. That's just how it is, because no one wants to go through that room again and wake up all the giants or have to kill them again. It's just not worth the effort. The easiest way to do that is literally just have somebody AFK and not play the game. And this is also terrible because this mechanic just feels very unpolished. There's no animation or any indicator at all that the room will respawn. If there's players that don't know the mechanic and they don't look things up, they have no idea what the hell they're supposed to do. There is no audio or visual indication that a room has respawned, and it's just really, really difficult to tell what the hell is going on, because when I first started playing this rundown with some of my friends, we gaslighted ourselves. We thought that we didn't clear a room because the enemies are back in it. We didn't know that the respawn mechanic was how it was until we looked it up after we finished the level. And again, it still promotes unfun gameplay, especially on levels like C1. Ignoring the whole somebody's got to spawn block the giant room, if you're doing extreme, nobody can ever step into room A if the airwave's not alive, because if the wave spawns and they spawn outside and they go walk through the giant room, well, they're 1 room away from the person in room A of extreme, so they just scream and wake up the giant room again. So everyone's got to run out, you got to kill the giants again, you got to waste a bunch of ammo, and then guess what? The giants are going to have respawned again anyways, so you got to deal with it a 3rd or 4th time. It's really infuriating to have to kill a room of giants 3, 4, maybe even 5 times over because of just a terribly implemented mechanic, or just the enemies decided to spawn from the one spot you don't want them to over and over and over again. It also creates this really unfun waiting game when I'm like, okay, I have to stand in this room and wait for the enemies to spawn, so then once they get into our zone, I can then cross from room C over to room B so I can go grab this resource. And then I have to very quickly make my way back, or just have to wait again, because if I ever step in room A, the enemies can spawn and they can set off giants. It's just really annoying. And while that one is more level specific, this can definitely happen on levels later in the rundown, and even on D2 the same thing happens. Once you go onto wave 3 of the reactor and it starts doing the very, very quickly repeating wave that spawns like the hybrids, and you have to go through the respawn room again to get to the zone that has all of the chargers, you again have to have someone stay in room A of that charger zone, because if they don't, then it's going to respawn the entire room again, and you've got to kill it a 2nd time, or even a 3rd time maybe. Just in their current state, the respawn rooms just put very unnecessary constraints on the players with their positioning in a game that so heavily punishes you for standing still. I mean, I've gone on about this for too long, but I think the last example I have is on D1 Extreme. If you wake up that room that has the Shadow Scouts in it, you have to have someone die in the room or die in the reactor. There's no way around it, because if you clear it and survive, you know, then that room's just going to respawn if nobody was in there. And if you have to stay in that room, there's a very, very slim chance that you're going to survive. So everybody else can run around the entire rest of the map, but someone has to stay in that room or someone has to die in there. And that's just really fucking stupid to me. You put this very unnecessary positioning constraint on one player of the team because it screws everybody else over if they don't do that. And sure, you can make the argument that you don't need to respawn block any of the rooms to be successful in a level, and for many cases this is true. There's a quote by Sid Meier, the creator of the video game Civilization, that pretty much sums up the situation perfectly. The quote is as follows: "Given the opportunity, players will optimize the fun out of a game." And I think that holds true, especially in the case of GTFO, where this is a, you know, fairly difficult game. And people are going to be looking for any advantage that they can get, especially due to the hardcore nature of this game. And because it's so easy to just spawn block a room, you don't need to do anything, you just need to stand in one spot and not move. People are going to do it all the time because it's super easy to execute on, and it's ridiculously effective. With all my complaints about the respawn room out of the way, we can actually just talk about ways that they can potentially fix it. I think one of the biggest things is, well, again, I actually don't think that this mechanic within itself is a terrible idea. I think respawning rooms is fine if it's implemented properly. You know, and one of the ways they can do that is when you complete specific map objectives, then it can respawn rooms. So I think if you're doing C1, once you complete the terminal uplinks, I think that would be a perfect time to respawn the rooms. There also needs to be indications of things. There needs to be an audio indication when rooms respawn, maybe even a visual indication for the pods. Some of them are popped open, blah, blah, blah. Or it can stay as it is now, but there needs to be some kind of change to the amount of times a room can respawn. And you should reward players for taking the time to clear it multiple times. If I want to sit there and C1 and clear every giant room 5 times over and it stops them from respawning, I should be allowed to do that, or at least reduce the population of the room down to an amount that feels rewarding for killing it numerous times. Or they could also just completely scrap the system the way it is now and go with some of the things I've seen in game suggestions. I've seen multiple people suggest that it should respawn part of the room based on a timer, and there should be a visual indication and an actual like animation for when a room is in the middle of respawning. And you can, you know, have one person sit in the room, sure, to maybe not spawn block it, but to kill the room as it tries to respawn. This keeps the intent of the mechanic intact, while also actually providing interactivity for the people that are staying behind. I think this is probably the best solution, but it's obviously the most development resource intensive. But if they can manage to pull it off, I think it would pretty much put this mechanic in the perfect place. And they can even combine these ideas. They can have 2 different types of respawn rooms. You know, ones that respawn based off of the timer suggestion, and rooms that'll just respawn based off of objective completion that have, you know, maybe an audio indication that the room's respawned. But in its current state, something's got to change because it's just really terrible and unfun to play with. Moving past all of that, we can start talking about some of the new actual level and objective additions to this rundown. So let's start with talking about probably one of the more fun ones, which is the giant S1 scans, and these are found on B3 Extreme and on C2 Overload. I really love these scans. I think these are probably one of the more fun ones I've actually seen in this game, just in its entirety. It reminds me of playing Sanctum, which is pretty much like a FPS tower defense game. And the planning process for doing these scans is actually pretty good. I feel like if you actually know what's coming and you actually prepare for it adequately, much like the rest of this game, things go a lot smoother than if you didn't. C2 Overload has been cheesed a lot, which is kind of unfortunate, because you can just pull giants, but for the most part, if you don't do that, it's actually a really, really fun scan. Multiple boss enemies, multiple big enemies. It's basically like playing B4, but on a much more grand scale. And the same thing for B3 Extreme. Except the prep time matters a lot more. If you get your mine places like perfectly, you can pretty much kill all of the hybrids before they even shoot at you, as long as they don't have line of sight when the door opens. And, you know, putting your sentry guns in the right spots can pretty much destroy the hybrids, the tanks, and even the big chargers. Overall, I think these are actually really good. I think it would be really cool to have even these as like classed alarms. So you have to go through one giant scan, and then you move to a different zone to do another really giant scan. I think that would be really, really cool. But overall, yeah, these are a fantastic objective, and I'm really happy that they're in this rundown. Another really nice addition is the addition of mixed alarms. These are really cool in my opinion. It actually makes alarms feel a lot more dynamic, especially the Class 7 one on C3. That one's probably the most fun. Yeah, like I said, it just makes alarms feel a lot more dynamic, and it's a nice change of pace. Moving on, we also have the big cluster alarms, the S1 clusters that their name changed to. These are found in D1 and on D2. I like these as well. I think these are a really cool alarm. As annoying it can be sometimes with scan RNG, I think putting them in a larger room compared to a smaller room is a better idea, because it adds to the feel of having a more dynamic alarm that requires you to move around and actually defend different positions around the room. And I think D1 does an amazing job of that. The scans move, you move with them, you go upstairs, you go downstairs, you're shooting down one sight line, you're defending a staircase behind you. It feels a lot more dynamic, and I really like that for an alarm. This is very minor, but the lockdown bulkhead doors I feel like is also a nice addition. It lets you know that things are going to be a bit more hectic as you go through the level, compared to, alright, we're going to do the scan and now we're going to go forward. It lets you know that, unlike cases like A3 where you still have these scans during air alarms, the ones on A2 and on C1 let you know that something is going to happen very, very quickly as soon as you finish some objective. Once this objective is finished, if you want to do this side objective, you have to go here very, very quickly, and it just makes things feel a bit more hectic, which I kind of like. B4, I really like that level. It actually promotes planning in the middle of the level, which I think is a really, really cool thing. It feels like a more grandiose air alarm, which is pretty much what it is, just a more glorified air alarm. But it keeps you on your toes pretty much the whole level. And if you can plan properly, know what doors to save, know when to mine a door, know where enemies are going to spawn from, know when to grab resources, and just plan accordingly and work on the fly with the rest of the level as things are changing around you, you'll do fine. I really like this level. I put up my description for my level guide. I think that even having one of these every rundown or every other rundown, I think would be great. Even having, one as a D tier level where you have even more objectives going on. You have to do scans in the middle of all these areas. You have to move things around. You have to put in terminal commands. Just having objectives evolve with the game as it progresses is pretty much the best way for this, the best direction for this game to go in. And on that note, I think that C3 fucking blew this out of the water. Amazing objective in this level, I think. The dual terminal uplink is great. It promotes more team play, and it is a great evolution on a current kind of blanded, boring objective. Uplinks are kind of bog standard. Spawn block this, C-foam this door until the uplink is over, move on. This one requires you to actually shoot. And yeah, I kind of like that. I actually like playing the game. So uplinks are kind of boring, but this one takes that feel away and actually makes it feel a bit more hectic, which I kind of enjoy. The air alarms, the ones you can turn off this rundown, I kind of like. They're more rushy, more, you gotta think fast, you gotta go fast. No time to think, just go, just go, just go. Those are pretty fun, especially when they're the more high threat ones, like the all giant one or the all charger one from, B3, or the all charger one from E1. Those kinds of air alarms are pretty fun. I do think E1 overdid a little bit by having 3 of them, but for the most part, it's a pretty fun objective. On the topic of E1, even though it's completely unintentional, cell skip is a thing, and it's actually pretty cool in my opinion. And it opens this really interesting idea of having multiple different ways to complete a level, or even having level variations, which I think would be great. It would add to the replayability of the game, and it would make a lot of levels feel more dynamic and not just set in stone, this is the way you play it. Moving past the new objectives, we're going to be talking about the level difficulty and level quality. Overall, this rundown, I think the levels are actually pretty strong. I feel like a lot of them are really, really good. Namely, C3 I really enjoyed, B4 I really enjoyed, and C2 is amazing. I love that level so much. But even though there are some good levels, there are still some that were really bad. Namely, B2 prisoner efficiency and D1 extreme were just really, really unfun. I'm genuinely surprised that B2 actually passed in the state it's in now. D1 is just more of a slog than anything else, but that one's passable. I really hate B2. I might be biased to it, but that level just pisses me off. It takes every unfun mechanic in this game and just combines it into one. It's just stupid. I don't like it. But again, overall, I think the level quality was really good. The issue I have is that the level difficulties were very sporadic and seemed very, very out of tune and out of place for where they should be. If you don't do any of the side objectives, there is literally nothing that prepares you for C1. The difference between doing C1 and any of the other B levels is it's such a huge step up in difficulty, it's almost absurd. Even B3 compared to B2 is really insane. I don't expect there to be a charger alarm in Infectious Fog. And most players that don't do the side objectives, they're hard stuck on that level. It's very, very difficult. It's a huge jump in difficulty, and it doesn't get better from there. C1 is another huge jump in difficulty. And C2 introduces shadows with no indication of what they are. So I feel like this rundown did a very poor job of actually doing progressive difficulty and preparing people for the levels and the challenges that come as you go through the rundown. And even some of the side objectives in these levels themselves are absurd. There's a mother in A2, which baffles me how that made it into an A tier level. Like, that is absurd to me. You know, and to top that off, it's on a scream door too, so you didn't even get a chance to see it in stealth. The last rundown, the first time you saw Mother was in B1, and it was in stealth. You know, that's a huge jump in difficulty from the last rundown. Like, big chargers are in B1 of this rundown, but they weren't a thing until the C or D tier of the previous rundown. It is really bad. And the first time you see a shadow is during C1 Extreme, and they do that during an air alarm with a Mother in the zone. Like, there's very little indication of what these enemies are, and there's no chance for newer players to actually learn what they are. There's not a single level in this rundown that can reasonably teach a player what a shadow is, other than maybe D2 in the first few zones. And again, I think that ties into an overarching issue, which I'll discuss later with the player experience, the new player experience specifically. But this rundown specifically, I feel like there is a very poor job in doing incrementally increasing difficulty, and some of the jumps just seemed random and sporadic just across the board. Lastly, regarding level difficulty, there was the across-the-board nerf to almost every single level of the rundown. Most of them involving the respawn rooms, but in the case that they are now, some of those shouldn't even have made it into the state they were. A1 on release was a nightmare for new players. Disregarding the fact that the respawn rooms, there's no explanation how they even worked. Even if these players knew how they worked, they don't have a grasp of how stealth mechanics work. And most of the time when players wake up a room when they're just starting the game, they just tend to shoot it and they lose a lot of health anyways. They don't really have they're lost. They don't understand how the game works yet. And by throwing every single room in every zone in that level as a respawn room is completely absurd, and it just shows a general just lack of understanding of the difficulty spike and just the learning curve in general for this game. I'll discuss this later on, but all in all, while the level quality of this rundown I thought was amazing, the actual difficulty scaling and just had the difficulty just increase throughout the levels, being just as sporadic as it was just very poorly executed, and it is a very bad experience for new players. And, you know, I understand it's a hardcore game, but a game is only as strong as its community is, and if you only have veterans playing the game, your game is going to die out when they don't want to play it anymore. If you're not drawing in new players, your game will never survive. And again, I'll talk about this later on, but this is a huge point that they really need to get down before this game hits the 1.0 release at the start of the year. They cannot be having these huge, just sporadic spikes in difficulty with no explanation of how any mechanic or enemy in the game functions. Overall, with, you know, all things considered, this is still a very solid rundown. It's just not for the newer players, which is really upsetting. If they want to be vigilant and they want to stick around with this game, there were many, many opportunities for people to learn so much about how the game works this rundown. At least compared to Rundown 4, in my opinion. Again, I might not be the best judge of this. I don't want to put like a number rating on my overall opinion of this rundown. I don't want to be like, oh, it's 10 out of 10, or oh, it's 1 out of 10, because I've been around for a whole long time. I really haven't. I got up to the C tier, playing with 2 of my other friends. I wasn't even at full 4 squad for Rundown 4. We got up to C2 prisoner efficiency, doing prisoner efficiency on everything prior before we stopped. And on Rundown 5, this is the only rundown I've actually completed. So compared to other rundowns, I don't really know how this one stacks up, but in my opinion, overall, barring the difficulty scaling, it was a very solid rundown. So that pretty much marks the end of the rundown review. If that is all you cared about in the video, that's pretty much all I have for you at least. If you care about my thoughts on the state of the game and things I feel like should change going forward, stay tuned because we're going to get into that. Alright, so these are the thoughts on the current state of the game. I have a lot of things I want to cover, so this is going to take easily like the longest part of the video. I would be surprised if this takes less than 40 minutes. So we're going to be here for a while. So we're going to start by talking about some of like the more basic stuff. Quality of life is a huge thing in this game that it desperately needs. And one of that is being able to draw on the map and have that like actually stay, just have like a permanent map drawing. And pretty much just also being able to move resources. The second one is more of a mixed bag when you ask people if they should, you know, make that a thing where you can move resources around different boxes. In my opinion, having tedious activities such as running between two parts of the map over and over to just move resources is really annoying, especially when someone on your team doesn't listen. You say, don't pick up this resource, you want to swap it for something, and they pick it up anyways. Now you can't swap that. To me at least, it feels really stupid and doesn't feel like an actual difficulty. To not be able to move resources around through teammates, like swap them between teammates at least, or just put them in a box so you can save them there for later. That just feels really dumb to me, why you're not allowed to do that. You should just be able to pick up a resource and then put it back down in a box. I think a huge example of this is levels like C2. That level, you know, normally takes like 2.5 hours, 2 hours 40 minutes to do prisoner efficiency on. Without question, at least 20 minutes of that is just running around. And that's just kind of dumb that, you know, almost a fifth of the level length is just running between different zones to get resources and get consumable items. You know, that doesn't feel like it's difficulty. That just feels super tedious because it's, oh, you know, we have a bunch of meds. Where are they? Oh, they're all in the reactor and you're on the last surge alarm. So like, okay, so now you got to run all the way to the reactor. You got to get all the meds, burn them, and then you got to all run all the way back. And that takes like easily just 5 minutes just running around like that. But if you're allowed to move them, I would just move them all once ahead of time somewhere else so we didn't have to deal with that. Another example of this is things like uplink terminals. Normally you want to try and move tool refills into the same room with the C-foam launcher so they can pick them up in the middle of the uplink if they have to. But again, it just feels really annoying because it's, if you don't get any resources to spawn in that room, or if somebody forgets and they just pick one up, well, now you can't swap it, so you can't put a tool there. It just feels really annoying, and specifically it feels kind of arbitrary, that you have a lowered success rate at whatever mission you're doing, or maybe not even a lowered success rate, but you don't have as much as of an advantage in the level because somebody picked up a resource pack early. They didn't have to use it, they just literally touched it, and you can't ever put it back. And on the topic of touching things once and not being able to find them, you can't ping items that you've moved around in storage boxes anymore. And while I'm not necessarily asking to be able to ping anything that you throw in a storage box, we should have some kind of permanent ink, or at least update the map like so it actually shows resources in lockers on the map. There's an entire legend on the map that tells you, you know, it has icons for the meds, the ammo, and the tool, but it doesn't actually use them. It only uses them if you actually ping the item, but it's like nigh impossible to ping items in boxes anyways. So if we could get like permanent ink on a map so we could draw and say, you know, med here and point to a box, or if it would actually just show the meds in the box, it would save so much hassle and time of just, yes, I'm running around this zone, I know somebody put a 4-use med in here, but I don't know where it is. And you have to check every single box in order until you find it. It's just really annoying. And again, it doesn't really feel like it's a real difficulty, it just feels super arbitrary. You know, and they're also already putting the lockers on the map. They might as well just go the extra mile and put the resources on them as well. Another thing that would be really useful is if you could right-click to open up a menu that would have all the different icons on them, and you could click and drag them around and put them somewhere on the map. So that way you could, you know, you could drag a medkit icon over to a storage box, and you now know, hey, you have a medkit here. This game has a very small enemy pool that it draws from. The problem with this is that while they have been adding enemies over the rundowns, they've all either been enemy variants or they've been boss enemies. And while those are nice to have, it gets really stale when the only 3 basic enemies in the game are strikers, shooters, and chargers. There just isn't enough enemy variety. Most of the enemies that we have are just variants. You know, the Shadow Scout is just a variant of the Scout. The Charger Scout is just a variant of the Scout. Big strikers and big shooters just a variant of strikers and shooters. Babies are just a variant of smaller strikers. Shadows are just a variant of an enemy. You know, the list goes on. Pretty much almost every single enemy, with the exception of like hybrid, seems to just be a variant of an already existing enemy. So there just needs to be more variety in the enemies, and the things that they add, they can't be bosses anymore. We need to have more things spawning in alarms, more things to actually mix up the pace and the feel of the game. There just needs to be more. It just doesn't feel like there is enough enemies yet. And I feel like this, personally, is a very weak criticism of mine, just because I can't substantiate it with anything, but I do feel like there just needs to be more. So now that I have some of these smaller topics out of the way, I'm going to move towards some of the larger ones, and the first one is going to be kiting. Before we get started with it, I just want you to know this is going to take like 20 minutes on its own, I think. So just be prepared for that. You're going to be in for the long haul. I'm going to try my best to unpack everything related to it, because it's a very complex issue. There's not one thing that contributes to why kiting is so good. It's a multitude of many different things. We're going to talk about circle kiting before we talk about long kiting, just because once I start talking about long kiting, it's going to get into the hammer meta as well, and we're going to be talking about both those at the same time. It's going to be a whole mess, so we're going to talk about circle kiting first. Circle kiting, if you don't know what it is effectively running in a circle around the enemies, because if you sidestep an enemy tongue far enough, it just misses, and if you're running in a circle, you're constantly walking far enough around to sidestep them, so they just miss. And in its entirety, it is just running in a circle to cause enemies to miss their attacks. I'm going to put some footage of me doing it in B4 just for as long as I can until I get bored, but that's all there is to it. It's literally just running in a circle, and it pretty much makes you impervious to damage, and if you're the host, where you don't have to deal with enemies killing you on latency, you pretty much just are immune to damage by doing this. And on some levels like C1, it's the dominant strategy for extreme, because, you know, if they break the door, somebody says, oh, let's go kite shadows, because shadows are slower, and it's even easier to circle kite shadows than it is normal enemies, even though you can't see them. It's pretty obvious why this is bad for the game, and the main reason is because it's pretty much an exploit, and if you don't want to call it an exploit, it's without question cheesing the game, and like in all aspects of the word. You can just trivialize pretty much all content in the game simply by just running in a circle around the enemies. It's actually ridiculous. Circle kiting, in my opinion, falls under degenerative gameplay, and that's a term that many people don't like, and you'll find a million different definitions for it. But the one that I'm going to use is, I define degenerative gameplay to be gameplay that is wildly out of touch with how the game would expect you or how the game wants you to play, or gameplay that is just really unfun for parties participating in it. I think the best example I have of this up until this point is the respawn rooms. Respawn blocking is regenerative gameplay. It's not fun for anybody to participate in, and it's definitely not how the developers want you to play. Specifically because one of the level nerfs for C1 was to add team scans to the terminals to stop people from being able to respawn block everything. And other examples of this are the Solemn Vow in competitive Team Fortress 2. Basically, it's an item that lets you see enemy Ubercharge, and that is banned in competitive because it causes stalemates, because if you see your enemy as an Ubercharge, you don't want to push at all. So that's considered degenerative gameplay in that game. And ledge camping in Super Smash Bros. Melee, just sit on the ledge, you keep jumping off of it, you have unlimited immunity frames, so you can't ever take damage, and you just have to force the other player to approach you. You can do that pretty much for like minutes at a time. It's really unfun to do, it's really unfun to play against, it's really unfun to watch. Circle kiting is unfun to do, and it's unfun to play with. As you can see by this footage now, however long I've been doing this for, I'm still just running in a circle. It's not fun, it's just running in a circle. It has a novelty, but after you do it for like 5 minutes, that novelty just completely wears off, and it just becomes really tedious and boring. And if you're in a lobby with anybody and you're circle kiting is again not fun to play with on your team, because you're not playing the game. You're standing in one spot waiting for an objective or a scan to finish, while one person just runs in a circle. And again, it's like that quote I said earlier, people are going to optimize the fun out of the game. It's not the developer's job to necessarily punish people for doing these kind of strategies. It's the developer's job to fix the mechanics surrounding them, and to actually make these mechanics engaging. So being able to dodge enemy attacks should be a mechanic. It should be something engaging that the players actively participate in. And by doing that, it not only makes it more fun, it also increases the skill ceiling of the game, which is always great in my opinion. But as it stands now, circle kiting is definitely degenerative gameplay. Without question, I don't think that you're supposed to circle kite, the entirety of the 10 code shadow uplink on C1 by running in a circle, and I don't think you're supposed to kite the first alarm on D1 by running in a circle. These are not things that are designed to be done. These are not things that are healthy for the game, because it just perpetuates this idea of, why would we do it normally when you can just cheese it, when you can just kite it? I don't want this game to go down the same route that Destiny does. In Destiny, you cheese literally everything in the game. There were people that I played with that literally quit the game because they fixed a bunch of exploits and bugs and cheeses with one of the raids that came out with the most recent DLC. And while that is an extreme case, this game is already starting to go down that route when people are suggesting, don't C-foam the doors on C1, just kite it. You don't need to shoot D1, just kite it. You don't need to do X, Y, or Z, you can just kite it. Why would we do anything else? People are going to optimize the fun out of the game, and this is what circle kiting does. It just promotes unfun gameplay because you're not playing. Most people don't have a huge problem with it because, again, they only care about level clears for the most part, especially on levels like D1, but it just becomes really unfun. And, that might sound like a stupid point to a lot of people, but at the end of the day, it's a video game. We play these video games to enjoy ourselves. If I'm not enjoying myself, I'm not going to play it. It's literally as simple as that. With all of that out of the way, we can begin to discuss ways that we can actually fix circle kiting. One of the big things that can be done is to give players the ability to actually dodge, and I'll discuss that as well. And the second really big thing is to make enemies themselves less susceptible to circle kiting. And I'm going to talk about that first because the way I worded it is very, very bad, and I just have to explain it for it to make sense. So basically, I'm going to try an example to Dark Souls here. Dark Souls 1, it is very, very easy to backstab enemies. Without question, you just literally walk behind them and you backstab them. The enemies don't do anything, they get locked in their attack animations, and they just sit there and do nothing for about a second. It's super easy to get backstabs. Compare that to Dark Souls 3, that doesn't seem to be the case. It's actually much, much harder to get backstabs on enemies because enemies have much smarter AI where they will cancel their attack if you walk out of their radius, and they will also instantly turn to face the player once they finish their attack. And I feel like GTFO could take some notes from that. If you walk outside an enemy's attack radius right now, the enemy sits there, finishes their attack, waits for about half a second, and then turns to you. I feel like if you walk outside an enemy's attack range, they should cancel their attack, immediately turn to face you, and attempt to attack you again. This pretty much would make circle kiting very, very difficult, if not impossible to do, because enemies are going to be constantly attacking, and they're going to be constantly turning to face the player, and they're not going to have, the player's not going to have the time to actually get out of the way of their tongues. Especially when all the enemies are attacking out of sync from one another, it would make this very, very difficult, if not impossible. And as you can see by this footage, this singular sleeper is most of the time continuing his attack, even though I've left the attack radius pretty much at the very beginning of his animation. Even right there, he goes through, follows through with the attack, but I'm not even in his attack radius by the time his tongue is even halfway to coming out. So again, have sleepers stop their startup attack animation if you leave their radius before they finish it, and then also have them immediately turn to face you when this happens and try and tongue you again. This is also good because it doesn't entirely kill melee gameplay, it just requires you to watch your positioning a lot more, and if you see an enemy getting ready to attack a teammate, it incentivizes you to kill that enemy over whatever ones are behind you. The other thing they can do to help fix circle kiting is they can just entirely rework the side dash that you have. If you don't know what that is, you can tap shift while you're moving left, right, or backwards, and you will do a short little dash to the side. This is almost entirely worthless as it is now, because all it does is just let you dodge shooter bolts, but you can just crouch under those anyways, and it's a lot easier, and you don't have to stop moving forward to do that. This side dash mechanic is literally pointless as in its current state, and they could just rework it, so I just triple the distance that you get from it, or maybe even quadruple it, but then give it a 3 to 4 second cooldown. This way, this actually works as a dodge mechanic in melee, and in conjunction with the previous change that I suggested, you can actually, give legitimate melee dodge gameplay, and it will actually make things feel a lot smoother to play. And not only does it still allow players to do melee, but it, again, increases the skill ceiling of it, which is always a good thing. So now that we've talked about circle kiting, we can start talking about long kiting. Long kiting, the general gist of it is because you run slightly faster than the sleepers do, and because sleepers can't traverse terrain in the same way that players can, you just go to the other side of the map pretty much as fast as you can. So like, let's say you're doing like a scan or like a surge alarm or something and someone dies and you can't revive them, you just run to the opposite side of the map, wait for the sleepers to get to you, and then run back and close a bunch of doors on the way, so they take even longer to get to you, and then you just revive them and do the scans. Long kiting isn't necessarily as egregious as circle kiting is, but it still does have its problems, and it still is broken. And by broken, I mean it's overpowered, and it does have some really weird bugs to it. One such bug is door tricking or rerouting. They're both the same thing. The general gist of that is that, let's say that there's two entrances to a room. There's a front entrance and a back entrance. If you leave the front door closed and you open the back door, the enemies are going to run through that back door instead of breaking down the front one. And if you open this front door, run through it, and then close it behind you, when the enemies are in the room, they're just going to run all the way back out the back door again, instead of breaking down the front door to get to you. So you can do this to juggle enemies between two spots pretty much infinitely. And while this is funny, it's also just abusing the enemy's just pathing AI. Enemies also tend to break doors slower if you are far away from them. I don't know the exact number of rooms you have to be, but if you are far away enough from the enemies, they will break doors slower. So the longer a map is, the larger a map is, the more effective long kiting is going to be, because the players do run faster than the sleepers. So the longer it is, the more distance you can gain on them, and then there's going to be more doors. So the more doors you close, the even more distance that you're going to be able to gain. This is really, really notable on C2. If you kite all the enemies back into zone 400, which is the zone that had the singular charger scout in the extreme section, and you go through there and you gather all the enemies in that room, and then you just run out and close literally every single door on the map on your way back to the scan, you can finish the class 4 surge before the enemies actually get into the room with you, which is kind of ridiculous. And I know this is an extreme case because it's C2 and the map is fucking ginormous, but the mere fact that that is even possible is what is stupid. Long kiting, people like it because it can save runs, but it doesn't discredit it from being completely overpowered and just broken. And one of the things that is going to happen if they end up nerfing long kiting is it is going to kill solo gameplay, and I think that's why they've been so hesitant on it. But in all honesty, I could not give a fuck about solo gameplay for the most part. I know that makes me sound like an asshole, but I just don't care. Solo gameplay isn't really all that interesting because it's just long kiting. That's the entire level pretty much if you're doing solos. If you want, you can literally look up a video of D1 main objective solo, and somebody a few weeks ago, even a few weeks ago, I think a few days ago, or at least when the time I was recording this, uploaded a video of C3 Extreme solo. The C3 video I think was 2.5 hours, and there was only about 30 minutes of actual gameplay of clearing rooms. The rest of it was just kiting. And that's just dumb. I hate to say it, but it's just stupid. You can do any level in the game by yourself by just running around the entire map and then coming back to do scans. The video of C3 Extreme solo, the class 7 alarm and the uplink terminals were literally 30 minutes each. And all they did was run to the other side of the map, run back to the objective, complete one of the 3 terminal codes, gather the enemies, run back to the other side of the map. And it's stupid. Again, I think it does fall under degenerative gameplay. Definitely not what the developers expect anybody to be doing. And it is definitely not fun. You're just running a marathon for 2.5 hours. Something has to be done about long kiting, and unlike other topics I'll bring up later in the video, I prefer if they would take a more direct approach to nerfing long kiting, instead of changing other systems or adding things to the game that would more indirectly nerf it. Because partially one of the reasons why the respawn rooms even got added was to nerf long kiting, so they could fill a room with enemies and disincentivize players from running back through it. The other thing is, I don't think that running around the map is a bad thing. You should be able to do that. If I set off 3 scouts in a zone, I'm not staying in that zone. I'm fucking off. I'm going somewhere else so I can deal with that in a better area. Yeah, the players should have the freedom to run around the map, but not to the extent that they do now. And I feel like the solution to this is not to do the Call of Duty Zombies approach, which is where enemies die and just respawn closer to the player if they're too far away. Because in all honesty, in this game that would cause way more problems than what it's worth. I think the solution to this is to add a stamina bar. And I know I just made a bunch of people like almost flip their tables when I said that. I have a way to make this not completely cancerous and terrible to play with. At least my solution to it is to have a dual stamina system. So you have one stamina bar that depletes very quickly and recharges very quickly. And then you have a second stamina bar that only depletes when your first one is empty. Comes back much, much slower, but has a much, much greater amount of stamina in it. And then if you're standing still, it regens at twice its rate. So what this does is it actually gives players a pool of stamina to draw from, so they can still run around the map if they need to. But it doesn't let you do the stupid things that long kiting lets you do now, which is where you just run forever across, 8 or 9 zones just so you can get the enemies really far away from you. But if you need to run, it still gives you the opportunity to do that. And by having it come back at twice its rate when you're standing still, this doesn't screw people over for just general map traversal, because, if you're standing still at a storage box or you go to sprint towards a zone that you're going to be stealthing through, you're going to be standing still in both those scenarios anyways, so it's going to be coming back at a much faster rate. Also, if you're doing scans, it doesn't screw people over for using it to get out of the zone or back into the zone, or for running around in the scan room itself, because once you go back into the scan, you're going to be standing still in the scan anyways, so you're going to be eating your stamina back twice as fast. On a side note, this would also be good because they could use this opportunity to buff the IIX syringe, which is the yellow one, which nobody ever uses. And what they could do with this is they could not only give it the bonus melee damage, they could retain that, but they could also make it so for the amount of time that it lasts for, you get no stamina consumption and you regen while it's active. Again, there just needs to be a system in place that doesn't punish people for traversing the map and actually running around and retreating if they have to, because there are so many scenarios in this game where you actually do need to run away. But it should punish players for only running away and not doing anything else. And ideally, this shouldn't have a huge impact on gameplay. You should only notice it if you are kiting in excess or if you're just hammering too much, because you have to sprint so much when you're hammering. So this should also work to slightly nerf the hammer meta as well. And on the topic of the hammer meta, it pretty much goes without saying that hammering is currently just way too strong in its current state. The hammer's super effective, does a really good amount of damage, requires no ammo to use, and there's very little risk in doing it. So a lot of the time it just is the just dominant and optimal strategy. When you wake up a room, it's like, oh, well, there's only 15 guys who just hammer it. It doesn't matter. There's not one thing that makes hammering as strong as it is. There's a ton of different things that play into why hammering is so strong. Mainly, it's because none of the systems surrounding hammering really discourage players from doing it. So some of the main things that really drive people to do it is the fact that there is again little to no risk involved in doing hammering. Just how easy it is to dodge enemies currently. Which I did discuss in the circle kiting part of this video. And then another huge thing is just the health meta. So we'll talk about the health meta first, but typically in this game, you pretty much just stay at 20% the entire time. And you really only heal to 40 for scans, and if it's a hard scan, you heal to 60. And the reason for that is because there's no consequence to dying in this game. And if you're already at 20 health and you get licked, you just regen back up to 20. So if you're in a stealth situation and you wake up one dude and you get licked by him, well, that's just wasted health. But if you're already at 20, it doesn't matter, you just regen up to that. So everything is kind of just considered armor, quote unquote, once you're above 20. So it's just like a health barrier, so you can either tank hits from giants or you can tank multiple tongues without dying in a scan. And there's no consequence to dying in this game either, I think one of the biggest examples of this is the air alarm on C3 and just the entirety of E1. If you go down on any of those levels, that's it. Your team just revives you after they finish clearing whatever was awake, and then you just move on with the rest of the level like nothing even happened. And it's one of the reasons why hammers are so strong is just, why would I shoot when nothing bad happens if I die? There's already, little risk in hammering anyways. But if I die to an error alarm, what does it matter? I just get revived, then we move on anyways. And it just makes hammers just feel like, the dominant weapon, because there's just no consequence for it, and there's no punishment for it either. You don't have to use resources. Health is already kind of like useless as it is now. You can get through most levels with just like 4 use of meds for the entire level, just because you only need to use it for scans. And if you go down, your team just revives you, and then you get, revived at 20 HP. It's like nothing ever happened, and then you just move on. I think if the entirety of level B2 had like a 4 use medkit in it, and that was the only medkit in the entire level, nothing would change about the way that I play the level. It would still be just kind of just rush through the main objective to get to extreme, spawn block and C-foam the doors for the uplinks, start overload, just have someone fog dive and pull every room, perma-foam the door for the scan in the fog, pull the scout rooms, C-foam 2 doors and just shoot anything that comes to the security door when you're doing the main scan. Shoot all the rooms, grab the cell, and then you just do the last scan and you just C-foam the doors again. And another reason why health just feels so wasted is because for any scan that you can C-foam the door on, you don't need medkits, because you just keep the door closed and then a mine kills the entire wave. So with health being the way that it is, it just kind of encourages melee, because I don't need to shoot to stagger enemies and keep them off of me because I'm not scanning. And I don't want to be shooting because that requires me to, move slower and just stay in one spot. I'd much rather be able to run around wherever I want and just charge a hammer and smack things in the face mindlessly. Because again, not only is there very little risk involved in it because of how easy it is to dodge enemies, and when you do get hit by an enemy, health doesn't mean anything anyways. It also doesn't use any ammo, so there's really no downside to doing it. Another thing that makes melee so viable is that the clear times for killing things with melee are still pretty fast. They're almost comparable to guns in some scenarios. So here's a clip of clearing the aftermath of a surge alarm using practically only melee. This took about a minute to do, and we're at spawn cap with just 25 enemies. And for the most part, I'm perfectly okay with spending 0 bullets, but spending an extra 15 seconds clearing a horde of enemies if it doesn't require us to shoot at all. That is so much ammo that we get to save, and there's just no consequence for doing this. You really can just run around and dodge everything and just smack them with a hammer. Health means nothing because, barring the fact that this is on E1, it just kind of furthers this point that you really just can get away with this. Everyone's at 15% health, and it just doesn't matter because it's that easy to dodge stuff, and you can just hammer clear an entire surge alarm. Hammer clearing isn't necessarily degenerative gameplay. The devs definitely expected to do it to some degree because they did put error alarms into the game. But in its current state, it definitely is not expected, and it is not healthy. But it's not degenerative gameplay because, it is expected to some degree, and it is quite fun. And I know I'm not alone in saying that. The hammer is part of this game's identity, for better or for worse. It is hard to think of GTFO without thinking of the hammer, just because there's so much stealth in it, and all of the stealth is done with the hammer. And when you have error alarms on majority of the levels in the game, you're hammering the error waves almost every single time. It is in my opinion that the hammering needs to stay in the game in some way, but it cannot stay in the state that it is now, as it is just wildly unhealthy. And the main reasons for that, there are 3 main reasons. 1 being just how easy it is to dodge enemy attacks. 2 being that health is being the way it is. It just encourages melee gameplay. And 3, hammering is still very fast to do, and again, there's no punishment for doing so. Nerfing hammer damage in this game I don't feel like is the right route to go down, because it will make hammering almost entirely unviable during loud, and again, I feel like that is just going to completely kill an entire playstyle in this game, and that's not the right route to go down. In response to this, I suggest nerfs to the 3 main areas that make hammering so strong. which would be just how fast it is to clear enemies with hammer, the fact that health in this game pretty much means nothing, and the fact that it is super easy to dodge enemy tongues. I already talked about why it's super easy to dodge enemy tongues during the circle kiting section of this video, so I'm not going to cover that again. But definitely they need to make hammer clearing slower, and I think, you know, partially the way to do that is with the suggestion I recommended for fixing circle kiting. You won't be able to circle behind enemies as much because they'll be facing you a lot more, so it's going to be harder to hit them in the back of the head to get instant kills. And the other thing that I think they should do is that they should make your hammer charge slower while you are sprinting. And again, going back to the whole stamina thing, you are always sprinting when you're hammering, that your shift key is pressed down 100% of the time while you are hammering. So I feel like having that stamina bar would help dissuade people from hammering in the amount that they do now, just because it's going to burn their stamina so much faster. As it stands now, the current health meta is stupid, and not only does it play into why hammering is partially as strong as it is, but it's also just really dumb how you just don't heal ever unless you're doing a scan, and for most scans you don't even heal above 40, which is why I think you can get away with most levels with literally like 4 uses of medkits for almost the entire thing. To help fix this, I suggest that having a stacking debuff, for lack of a better word, where every time you go down, you gain reduced health regeneration up to 3 or 4 times until you use a med kit to make it go away. As it stands now, once you get hit by anything, there's a 5-second period before you begin health regeneration, and you will regenerate 1 tick of health every second, but every 5th% health that you regenerate has to tick twice in order to actually give you that health. What I'm proposing is that every time you go down, this percent that has to tick twice is lowered by 1. So the first time you go down, it is no longer every 5th% has to tick twice, it's now every 4th%. When you go down a second time, it's now every 3rd% has to tick twice. And when you go down a 3rd time, it's every 2nd% health has to tick twice in order to actually give you this health. This means that any damage you take is going to stick for much, much longer the more times that you go down. Not only would this incentivize players to play safer, it would also give medkits more of a use to help solve the health problem. Because as it stands, as long as you can regenerate up to 20% health, or any amount of health that is over 12 so you don't get one shot by tongues, medkits are going to stay the way that they are. Ideally, they would implement these changes, or at least things similar to them, because this would make melee clearing entire surge alarms very, very hard to do, and something most people wouldn't attempt. And it also doesn't entirely kill melee gameplay, so it still preserves that aspect of the game. There isn't really much else to say about melee gameplay. The two main things are really just the health system and the ability to dodge tongues needs to be changed, but both of those have been covered already, so we're just going to go ahead and move on. Next up is the new player experience, which in my opinion is just god-awful. There really is no excuse for why it is this bad, other than the developers just don't want to take the time to implement a proper tutorial. And we'll get into that in a moment, but as it stands now, the first 30 minutes of gameplay are some of the most infuriating moments that a new player is going to have, because this game offers little to no feedback on anything that happens. So if you mess up on something, you're not going to know what you messed up on. The game offers you no feedback on that. And this isn't more of like a stats page kind of thing. This is more of a direct, kind of intuitive way of gathering feedback. So the closest example this has is that sleepers will pulse when you move. The problem is there's nothing in the game that tells you that sleepers wake up based off of movement. And sometimes, you know, it was really, really hard to figure that out. The first 15 minutes of me playing this game where I walk into a room, a sleeper woke up, I assume, oh, it's because I'm walking. I crouch, I walk into a room, the sleeper still wakes up. I'm like, what the fuck? You know, and it's a learning experience, but as it stands now, it's a trial by fire kind of thing. You just bash your face into the wall until eventually you realize, oh, if I move at all while they're glowing. Well, that still took like 15 to 20 minutes to figure out, and then you had to get all that down for the first time, which within itself is already like a hassle. Implementing just anything in the game that would say, sleepers will glow, and if they're pulsing, they wake up when you move. Obviously not that simple, and not that blunt, but, you know, something should be done, because as it stands now, like I said earlier, the first 30 minutes of gameplay are fucking terrible for the new players. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but player retention is very important, especially for this game in its current state, because they are planning for a full 1.0 release with Rundown 6 by the end of the year. And if you don't have anything to keep new players in after the first 30 minutes, the game's just going to fail. I mean, really. They only get to come out of early access once, and this is one of the huge things that needs to get hammered in before they come out of early access, is having some proper tutorial, or at least something to reduce the frustration for newer players while they're still trying to learn the game's mechanics. And I understand that on their store page it says to go look at videos of the game so you know what you're getting into ahead of time, but the issue with that is not everybody wants to try and study a game before they even play it. Lots of people just want to buy the game, pick up, and go. You know, not many people want to sit there and watch this 20-minute or like hour-long video explaining how the game's mechanics work before they even decide if they want to buy it or not. It also can leave a very bad impression on new players. The first time I saw that on the store page, my very first thought was that the developers were just simply lazy. And the reason I thought that is because what I took that as is, go watch someone else explain to you how to play the game, because we're not going to. And the other thing that I think the developers are hesitant on for adding a tutorial is they don't want it to be bad. They don't want the tutorial to feel, pointless. But at the end of the day, something is better than nothing. And even fucking Dark Souls has a tutorial. It doesn't do a great job. It tells you the controls and it introduces some of the mechanics such as backstabbing and parrying. But it's something. And something is always better than nothing. The tutorial doesn't need to be fantastic, and it doesn't need to introduce everything in the game to the players, just the very basic stuff. So here's my idea for a tutorial. Call the level A0 and put it into every single rundown. A0 will consist of 2 zones. Zone 1 will only have 2 rooms in it, and Zone 2 will just be a forward extraction locked behind a security door, which is only a team scan. Inside of the first zone, there will be 1 storage box that will have 2 uses of every resource in it, and then there will be a box that has a varied amount of consumables. There will also be a terminal in the zone, and when you read the log files on it, it'll have logs that will explain, very basic things. This is what a sleeper is. This is what resources are. These are tools. Very basic, single or 1 or 2 paragraphs that you can read up on that'll explain the very fundamentals of the game. The second room will contain 6 to 7 normal sleepers, and that's it. No giants, just 6 to 7 normal sleepers, and then the security door to your extraction point. This will give the players a way to actually, use the things that they just read up on in a very controlled environment. This game needs to become more accessible. I'm not saying the game needs to be easier, because these are 2 very different things. The game needs to be more accessible and easier to learn, not easier to do. Not everybody should be able to complete E1, but everybody should have the opportunity to easily learn things in the game. And again, I don't think this tutorial point would be as big of a deal in other circumstances, but this game is heading into full release, and this is going to reduce player frustration if this gets implemented. Lastly is difficulty scaling. I mentioned this earlier in the video, but the developers do need to keep in mind that it's not just people that beat every rundown that play this game. And when they introduce enemies that people might not have seen before, they need to do it in a way that isn't completely and just utterly jarring. The C2 shadow alarm was really bad. I would have put at least 1 zone of shadows before that, just to make that transition way less intense. But yeah, they just need to just keep in mind there are more people that play this game other than the people that beat every rundown. So they need to at least have things in place to make transitions to higher difficulties a lot less jarring for those players. We're going to be talking about Jank next, namely Netcode. I know this game is a peer-to-peer game, so there's not a whole lot that can be done about the netcode. But if you look at me in the eye and tell me that there is literally nothing that can be done, that is absolute bullshit. I don't know much, but I know that there is at least something that can be done to fix some of this shit, because it is so annoying to get killed through walls by giants. And maybe if this was actually a rare occurrence, I would cut them more slack, but this happens way too often. I'm just going to go down a list of things that are caused by either desync or just by shoddy netcode. So I might miss a few things. The point isn't really to name everything, it's just a list of things that, are just examples. Scouts only crouching on host, getting killed through walls by giants. Any enemy that melees will teleport back and forth. Intense enemy jitter if you're playing on even decently high ping. Enemies themselves teleporting back and forth for seemingly no reason. Enemies getting stuck in walls. Giants not getting staggered when you hit them. Hybrids and other enemies just running in place while also shooting you. Giants just randomly walking forward and then teleporting backwards like 5,000 feet. Again, I don't really know much about programming, much less netcode, but if you look me in the eyes and tell me that nothing can be done about any of these things, you're a goddamn charlatan and a fool. All jokes aside, these are minor inconveniences that do affect the gameplay, and if any of these got fixed, or hopefully all of them, it would go a long way into making this game just a more complete and finished product. On the topic of jank, the last main thing is the hitboxes in this game. Giant hitboxes, if you destroy their arm is actually still there, it's just invisible. So if you try to hit one of their legs or even their chest and you go and hit their arm, even if the arm isn't there visibly, the hitbox is still there, it hits the arm, you get no stagger, he whacks you, you die, you feel sad on the inside. Also, some really weird stuff with Mom. If you try and shoot tumors at certain angles, even if you're actually shooting the tumor, you still get a white hit marker, meaning you're not doing any damage. So that's really weird. That should probably get fixed. That one's not as major as some of the other ones. And lastly, positional hitboxes are fucking stupid. I know I'm not the first person to say this. Whenever I shoot an enemy in the back, make it deal double damage as it should for shooting him in the back. This whole thing of I also have to be behind him is really stupid, and if you're on elevation, it doesn't work either. So if you're trying to shoot a charger scout, for instance, if you're on elevation and you're above him, you can't get a back shot. You literally cannot get a back shot. Even if your bullet goes straight through his back, it just does not matter. Also, if you're inside of the enemy's hitbox, it also doesn't count as you being behind them. So this gets really frustrating when you're trying to melee kill hybrids and you want to hit them in the back of the head. Sometimes you just can't. Also, it gets really frustrating when you're trying to kill crawling sleepers by hitting them in the back of the head, because you will never get the clean one shot. It will never happen because you're always inside their hitbox because this game has no collision. It's 2021. Why the fuck do hitboxes work like this? I actually just cannot wrap my head around it. They also already have the framework in place to actually detect if you hit them in the back anyways. Why does this whole positional factor come into play? It just causes more problems and bugs than what it's actually worth. I don't understand. Finally, on the jank list, we have b-hopping. Personally, I don't really care if b-hopping stays or if it goes. It really doesn't really have too much of an effect on gameplay. The results of b-hopping can still be achieved by just walking at people anyways. B-hopping just makes it faster. A lot of people don't like b-hopping because they either just don't understand how stealth mechanics work and they think b-hopping is just this holy grail that breaks everything, which it isn't. Or they, say that it breaks immersion, and I don't really care about immersion in this game either, and I'll talk about that after this. But yeah, b-hopping, I don't really care if it stays or not. It doesn't really have too much of an impact on the game. I will be a little sad though if they do end up removing it, just because it does make stealth faster, and waiting 15 seconds repeatedly for enemies to stop glowing can get really tedious when you're about an hour and a half or 2 hours into a level. Finally, I'm going to talk about immersion. This isn't on the jank list, but I'm still going to talk about it. I honestly feel like the developers need to make a decision if they want this to be a stealth game or if they want this to be a run and gun game. Because the direction they've been leading towards with Rundown 4 and Rundown 5 has been more towards the run and gun side, but they still advertise this as a stealth game with a heavy emphasis on atmosphere. And the way that the game is played right now, it just isn't. It is not a stealth game. This is a run and gun game that has short stealth segments as a part of it. Seriously, look at E1 this rundown and tell me with a straight face that this is a stealth game. One of the main complaints that I hear from new players, especially in regards to b-hopping, is that it breaks immersion, and at some point I just don't care. Immersion is not going to trump gameplay ever. Immersion is important, but gameplay is always going to be the thing that keeps people staying and coming back to the game. This isn't a single-player horror game. This isn't something like Amnesia or like SCP. You can't just have people sit here and play the game and say, oh, the atmosphere is great, and then do 1 or 2 playthroughs of it and never touch it again. This is a multiplayer game that people are going to play for hundreds of hours. Eventually, you're going to hit a point where you're not playing the game for its atmosphere anymore. You're playing it because you like the way the gameplay feels. And of course, atmosphere still matters. I'm not saying that it doesn't. TF2, for example, wouldn't be nearly as popular of a game, and it wouldn't have survived nearly as long as it has now if it didn't have the crazy cartoon atmosphere that it has. But at some point, when you're playing these kinds of games, you're not playing because you like the atmosphere anymore. You're playing because you like the game. And there's a huge difference there. Just something doesn't sit right with me with the developers advertising this as this horror stealth game that has some forced loud moments, when as early as A2 of last rundown and as early as A3 of this rundown, they're putting error alarms into the game. The developers need to make up their mind if they want to keep trying to advertise this as a stealth horror game, because the way things are now, this isn't a stealth game, and it hasn't been one for a very long time. Anyways, the state of the game review is finally done, so we're going to move on to the level tier list. So if you care about that, keep watching. Otherwise, that's all I've got. Hello, and welcome to the Rundown 5 level tier list. So here's how this is going to work. I'm going to go over all the objectives for every level. I'm not going to be basing them off of prisoner efficiency, because anything that has a good overload would basically be a good prisoner efficiency. So I'm going to be basing them off of each individual objective, being high, extreme, and overload. And tier list is going to work as follows. S tier is really good levels. Things that everybody should play at least once, because they're really fun. A tier is above average. B is average. C tier is below average. D is like avoid unless you only care about level completion. And F tier is like this should never have been added into the rundown in the first place. So yeah, with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So A1 main objective. This is going to go in B tier. It's not anything special, it's just pretty boring. Just go grab a terminal command. There's nothing special to it. Really not much else to say either. Just make your way through like 2 zones, put in a terminal command. That's it. A1 extreme. Although some of the scans for it are like kind of okay, I'm going to put it in C tier because levels where you just have to gather items really aren't all that fun most of the time. And, just going through zones just to grab plant samples, it's just a reskin of like OSIPs or GLPs. They're all the same thing. Gathering items really isn't all that fun. A2 main objective. Again, this one, or not even again, but this thing isn't really anything super special. It's going to go in C tier as well. It's mostly boring for the most part. It's just go in and do like 1 blood door, and like it's 2 scans, 1 blood door. That's pretty much it. You grab I don't even remember what it is, the lunchbox, don't even remember what it's called. The high set cargo. Grab that, and then you just extract. There's not really a whole lot to it. A2 extreme. This is also, well, not also. I think this one's gonna get B tier. This one is more a personal opinion, but I like the fact that it turns off the lights. It adds more environmental difficulty, which is nice. It changes the pace up a little bit. Overload for A2. This one is also going to get B tier. It catches you off guard, which is I think the whole point of it. It's just that's all there is to it. The prep time isn't super bad for it. If you have C-foam, if you have like 1 C-foam nade, it's not that bad. Bring a shotgun, you can kill mom really easily. Definitely kind of insane that is on A2 or an A tier level, having a mother. Kind of screws over new players for the most part, but it's kind of whatever. A3 main. I like this. This is solid A tier. A3 main's nice. Although it is just grabbing stuff from terminals, it's a new objective, and it's kind of unique for what it's worth. So, yeah. It's pretty nice. The scans are nice as well. The diminished alarms are cool. It's a really nice way to introduce new players to the mechanics of just higher class alarms in like a bite-sized, manageable way. So very good job. Hats off to them for that. A3 Extreme. I like this one. It's another bite-sized way to introduce players to stuff. It's just go in, get an HSU. There's no alarm on the HSU. It's just a team scan, and it activates an error alarm in the middle of it. But the class 5 alarm for Extreme is again pretty bite-sized, not too hard. Keep the door closed with C-foam most of the time. much like the one in Overload. So yeah, it's a solid A tier. I think it's pretty nice. A3 Overload. This one's gonna be B tier. Fog isn't really all that fun, but the fog mechanics in this one aren't super egregious. You don't have to deal with it too much for the most part. You can, I guess, not entirely ignore it, but for the first few zones of it, the fog is like at knee height, so there's a lot of places you can stand where you're not technically in the fog, or your infection gains at such a low rate, so it doesn't really matter at all. And again, the class 5 alarm in it is a good way to introduce new players to higher class alarms. B1 main objective. I think this one gets a solid A tier as well. I really like this one. The air alarm is pretty nice. It is kind of insane that big chargers are there, but it is still a very fun air alarm, and it can go really, really fast if you know where the terminal locations are, so you can just ping the HSUs that you need. But yeah, I think it's pretty nice level. B1 Extreme. C tier. It's just fog. That's it. Everyone's favorite mechanic is fog. Everyone loves fog. No one's ever complained about it once ever. It's just grabbing cells. It's just moving heavy objects through fog. That's pretty much the whole level. At least the whole entirety of Extreme. There's some blood doors, but the blood doors, you know, aren't really all that bad. If you have a minded player, the blood doors don't mean anything. And you can find a few explosive trip mines around the level if you don't have one, so it's not too big of a deal. But yeah, putting scouts in infectious fog, especially super dense fog, it's not necessarily like a bad mechanic. It's just really annoying and not really fun to deal with. B1 Overload. I do like this one. It's like tower defense pretty much. I said it earlier in the rundown review, something about Sanctum. It's like an FPS tower defense game. B1's reactor reminds me a lot of that. It's just 7 waves, and you just sit in one spot and pretty much defend it. It's pretty fun. It really just shows off how broken the Hell Rifle is this rundown, but I love the Hell Rifle. It's probably my favorite gun, so it's also a fun objective as well. B2 main. This one gets B tier. Again, it's just collection. It's really annoying because of the spitters. But it's not like super bad. The scans are pretty easy. And at least past the bulkhead door, I do like that zone. Lots of giants, 1 scout. If there's not the air alarm on, it's not super bad to stealth. But yeah, it's okay. It's not anything special. B2 Extreme, again, also gets B tier. Uplinks are just kind of meh. Especially with the spitters, it just makes it more annoying than anything else. But again, it's not really anything super egregious. But yeah, it's okay. And here we go. The moment we've all been waiting for is the B2 Overload. Without any questions, this one's solid F tier. Fuck this level. F for fuck. Terrible level. Terrible objective. I can go on for like 20 minutes on how much I hate this, but it pretty much is like, if you don't get the good alarm, it just makes it infinitely more annoying. It's more collection. It's all in fog. There's an air alarm active. You need the doors. The zones are really big. Tons of spitters. If you're a host, good luck fog diving. I hate this. It's terrible. B3 main. This one gets an A tier. I really like this level. It's pretty good. I really, really like the charger alarm. There's infectious fog during the charger alarm, so... But it's not super bad. It adds to difficulty, in my opinion. You have to be kind of fast moving through the fog zone and stealthing stuff. Or you can just shoot it if you want. Up to you. I do like the charger alarm, though. It keeps you moving fast, and it's every 2.5 minutes, so it's not at such a breakneck pace that it completely throws everything in the level out of balance. It's it's just the right speed to actually keep you moving, which I kind of like. Then B3 Extreme. I like this one as well. This one is also a solid A tier. It's a contender for S almost. I think getting to the extreme part is more annoying than anything else. I kind of like don't like the bulkhead scan that's in this level for the extreme objective, and then also the alarm immediately following that one is kind of just really weird. The enemies tend to just like take forever to get into the room, and then it's also not even like a hard alarm anyways. Most of the time you can finish 3 out of the 4 scans before they even get to you, so it's kind of brain dead. B4. This one gets an S tier. I really like this level. I really do. The whole concept of it is something fresh, something I haven't seen this game. And it's just new experience. That's always great. Having new objectives and new experiences and evolving objectives is, again, I've said this before, but it's the right direction for this game to go in. And more things like this would be fantastic to see in the game. C1, this level is not fun. This one gets a C tier. Uplinks are boring. Don't put 3 of them in the same level. Respawn rooms suck. Don't make the whole level balanced around respawn rooms. C1 Extreme, same thing. It sucks. It's really boring. Respawn rooms are annoying. This one gets a solid D tier. It's not a fun objective. It's just sit there and seafoam a door forever. Or have someone go kite shadows if you don't have seafoam. And then maybe kill the mother if she's in a bad spot. It's not great. It's a really boring level. I don't like running it too often. C2 High. I like this one. C2 High is nice. I give this one a good B tier. It's not anything special. I do like it though, but it's not anything super special. There's 2 surge alarms, which can actually be like kind of challenging. But I don't like the way they introduce shadows into the level. Outside of that, it's not anything special. It's 2 scans to go move around a bunch of cells, and then a scan once you complete the generator cluster. I feel like I would rate it lower if it didn't have the surge alarms at the end. But yeah, it's okay. I like it. C2 Extreme. This is probably my favorite reactor I've played in a very long time. This one is S tier. I love C2 Extreme. I love C2 in general, actually. The Overload is really fun as well. But yeah, the reactor is really good. I like it. It's good stuff. Good stuff. C2 Overload. Also, S tier. If you don't cheese it, it is probably one of the best things in this rundown. It really is. It is super fun to do. There's a couple different strategies you can do to actually do it normally, but any level that you can bring 3 sentries on, and that's what you're like supposed to bring, and that's the viable strat, are most of the time really, really fun. A lot of shooting, lots of bosses, lots of killing. It's a grand old time. C3 High. This one also gets S tier. The uplink changes are great. Again, I said it earlier, but changing objectives and evolving them with the game, that is how you progress a game and make it more engaging for people to play and more fun moving forward. C3 does this perfectly. This is really good. I like this level. C3 Extreme. This one gets a B tier. Again, it's not anything super special. The extraction can be kind of a pain sometimes if the enemies decide to spawn in front of you over and over and over again. But the extraction waves are pretty fun for the most part, so it gets a good B tier. D1 Main. I give this one pretty much a C tier. It's a really boring level for the most part. The scans aren't really like anything super fun. And after they nerfed one of the class 5 one, that scan's just really brain dead now because it's just normal dudes, and for some reason they don't really seem to spawn all that fast. It's just super punishing for no reason, and it's just mainly a slog to play. It's not really all that fun either. The S1 cluster is okay, although I do like the scan. The amount of chargers in it it's ridiculous, and the fact that you have to like throw fogs everywhere, breaks flashlights, makes it really annoying. D1 Extreme. This one gets a solid D tier. It's just, again, it's a slog. It's not really all that fun. It takes forever. There's a lot of waiting involved. It's so incredibly punishing. It's just not great. Again, if you don't want, like, if you only care about level completions, then I guess play this level. But if you just, like, want to play the game, don't play D1 Extreme. Just don't. D2. This one gets solid B tier. I don't really care for the reactor in this one too much. I know there's a lot of people that seem to like it, but it's just kind of like boring. Honestly, it's not really boring, I guess, but it's not really what I would expect from a D tier level. In all honesty, D2 should be a C tier. It just doesn't stack up to D1 in any metric, and honestly, the level is easier than both C1 and C2. E1, everyone's favorite level this rundown. I love E1. E1's great. There's so many fun things with this level. Meleeing giants is, like, always a great thing. I got really, really fucking good at it this rundown because of this. Cell skip is great. The error alarms are super fun. There's a lot of team coordination that's required. You do a good amount of backtracking, but thankfully they didn't put any respawn rooms into this level. So props to the devs for actually not using their terrible mechanic that they need to fix. Please fix it. But yeah, I really like this level. All the errors are pretty fun. Yeah, the giants are fun to kill. Hell Rifle is amazing to use on this level. Yeah, I mean, there's not really else to say. It's a good level. I really like it. So yeah, there it is. That's the final tier list for Rundown 5. If you're disappointed in this, I don't know what you expected. I don't know what to say. Yeah, this is the tier list. I had to record this all in one take, so I don't want to like go super in depth on stuff for fear of fucking up and having to re-record everything. But yeah, there you go. So there it is. We are finally done with this far too long video. It's almost an hour and a half long at this point, but I hope you enjoyed your stay. That's all I've got. Leave a comment or DM me on Discord if you want to discuss anything or just want to share your thoughts. Outside of that, I've really got nothing else. You guys have fun, and let's hope Rundown 6 is even better than this one.